Nice to see you all. So quick introduction. I'm Jamie Betts, founder of Neurosight. For the last 16 years, I've been specializing in assessment and selection as a business psychologist. And in that, since 2008, I've partnered with about 40 of the top 100 employers in the UK, designing, implementing, and validating end-to-end assessment and selection processes from application through online testing, interview assessment center, and offer. And what that experience has given me is an insider's perspective on the particular drivers of bias and the outcomes that that generates across the hiring lifecycle in many employers. This will be, I hope, an interesting but also challenging insight session. It's an important topic, and if we're honest with ourselves, this has been a problem that's persisted for far too long. And I'm sure that all of us would agree that we want to move hiring to a better place where bias-free hiring processes are the norm and not the exception. Let's dive in. So in terms of content, I'll give you a very quick intro to Neurosight, just 60 seconds, then the sales pitch will be over, I promise. And then we'll dive into the main topic, bias and adverse impact, a deep dive into the causes of bias and the outcomes that it drives. And this will be a data-led insight session. I'll bring it to life with case studies from large employers, and we'll end with some actionable insights that you can take away to potentially enhance diversity and reduce bias in your own assessment and selection processes. So let's begin. So who are we and why am I standing here today? So regular conventional online assessments score the answers, but they can't ask or answer certain questions. So, during an online assessment, is anxiety limiting performance? Do people find the decision easy or difficult? Are they neurodivergent, and could that be impacting their decision making? You can't answer questions like that if you're just scoring answers. So we use neuroscience and AI to reveal people's real-time cognitive journey during an online assessment. And through that, we not only raise the accuracy of the online assessment, we entirely mitigate bias. And we're partnering with leading employers like Grant Thornton, Virgin Media, and Sellafield. And I'll be sharing some of the outcomes that we're currently attaining in relation to diversity and neurodiversity a bit later. Anyway, that's it. Sales pitch over. Let's dive into the main topic, bias. So quick definition, a tendency to favor or disfavor certain groups, often resulting in discrimination, something I'm sure we can all align on and agree with. How many of you, just show of hands, have heard of the term adverse impact? Okay, about a third of you. So we measure bias in assessment processes by something called adverse impact. And the definition of adverse impact is if the selection rate for a minority group is less than 80% of the majority group, then we say there is adverse impact. It's a bit of a binary measure. It was developed some time ago in the US as an aid to detect discrimination in hiring practices. Just a few pointers on this. One, I don't think it's ambitious enough. So what it's really saying is this definition is saying, well, if it's 81%, there's no bias. And of course, that's nonsense. So I'm going to suggest through this insight session that our current accepted definition of whether there is bias in an assessment process is not sufficiently ambitious. That's kind of a general point. But nonetheless, this is how employers tend to measure whether there is bias in the process or not. In my view, it's a bit of a cop-out because you can still have meaningful differences between majority and majority groups and fit within this definition and say, hey, there's no bias. So where then does bias tend to exist in this selection process? Actually, before I do this, with a show of hands, I'm going to mention 3 stages in the process. Put your hand up if you think bias is a problem in that stage. I'm going to start with initial application and CV screening. Okay. Next stage, online tests and assessments. Okay, fewer hands there, but still a lot. And then how about in-person or virtual assessments, interviews or assessment centers? Okay, well, those who had your hand up 3 times, you're correct. Because bias is a pernicious influence and a measurable influence in each step of those selection processes. And when we talk about bias and end-to-end selection processes, your process is only as strong as the weakest link within it. Now, for many employers, this will look like a common assessment process. You'll have the application, you'll have an online test of some kind, particularly early careers and volume hiring, and then you'll have some kind of live assessment or in-person assessment. Application and CV screening, you can take concrete measures to mitigate bias. Certain applicant tracking systems will hide personal details, hide certain bits of demographic information, which can really help. Likewise, for live or in-person assessment, use structured interviews, unconscious bias training, all the things you've probably already heard of. There is, however, one element of this which has for decades produced by far the worst bias and hiring outcomes, which is the online testing component. Think verbal reasoning tests, numerical reasoning tests, personality tests, situational judgment tests. Any kind of online assessment you can imagine, the data clearly shows has horrendous bias linked to it, and employers cannot fix it, right? You have a degree of control over the in-person and the application screening. But if you're using an online assessment, you're in the hands of your assessment provider, right? You have to trust that what they're doing is working. And as an insider in the industry, and I've built and validated dozens and dozens of online assessments with major employers, it's a huge issue that's been largely swept under the carpet. And I don't think it's spoken about enough, because the scale at which these assessments are used is massive. Think, for example, of, say, the top 100 early careers employers in this country. And there are graduate schemes and there are apprentice schemes and so on. Millions and millions of applications. And if the online assessment component of those processes, and they all use online assessments, if it contains bias, the impact is massive, because the volume that they're screening out is huge. A single graduate scheme might get 100,000 applications, of which the online test screens out 90,000. Now, I recently engaged with a global RPO provider and their assessment lead there, and this is what they said to me. Time and again, we see diversity outcomes for our customers decimated by online assessments. So what is going on? We'll take verbal reasoning tests. We know they adversely impact BME candidates and those who are neurodiverse. Take numerical reasoning tests. We know the data is clear, and it's been for decades, that they adversely impact female candidates and neurodiverse candidates. We know that situational judgment tests and tests like them adversely impact people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who don't have a quiet place at home to study to complete these lengthy, dull assessments, BME and neurodiverse candidates. And can you see the common thread there? Neurodiverse candidates are impacted by all of these forms of assessments in different ways. So what's going on and why is it happening? There's been a lot of research and a lot of data on what I'm going to share with you around the causes of this bias is based on that data and the academic research linked to it. So, why is there bias in verbal reasoning tests? A couple of reasons. Cultural and language bias. There are lots of dialects in language. You know, if you go to school in Surrey, how you and your friends talk to each other might be different to if you're going to school in Wales or Scotland or Newcastle. There are regional variations in language that these tests don't account for. There are also socioeconomic factors. It's an unfortunate fact that in the UK, 45% of black households live in poverty. Socioeconomic factors, so access to education, resources, and preparation materials is limited. These tests can be prepared for. And in addition, there's a very interesting but concerning phenomenon called stereotype threat. A stereotype threat is where you go into a situation conscious of the negative stereotypes that are applied to you. You're not good enough. You're not going to get this job. There'll be better candidates from more privileged backgrounds. And that generates anxiety. And anxiety absolutely decimates online assessment performance, as it does interview performance and as it does performance in other kinds of assessment as well, including educational tests. We'll talk more about anxiety in a moment. Likewise, for numerical reasoning tests and female applicants, the stereotype threat resumes. You know, the great mathematicians are largely male. Going into engineering, which is a mathematical discipline, science, they're seen as male subjects, incorrectly, but they are. So that stereotype threat rears its head and the anxiety levels increase again. I'm not good enough. There are better candidates. I'm going to focus on anxiety in a bit more detail in a moment. And then when we take scenario-based assessments, these are very common in early careers and volume hiring. They present scenarios and ask how you would respond, and they present it in a workplace context. Now, if you're from a poor background, a low socioeconomic background, your parents don't work in the corporate sector, you don't go to a really good school, you can't really be supported to pass these assessments. And again, your anxiety is elevated. So paradoxically, what we see time and time again is the very individuals for whom this job opportunity represents a real opportunity, something they are strongly motivated and care deeply about. They are the very individuals who have the highest anxiety, right? Because they know the difference this could make to their lives. And that reduces their performance. It reduces their performance at interview. It reduces their performance in online tests. If you run assessment centers, it will reduce performance there. That is the problem, and we don't talk about it enough. So what can we do? Well, firstly, recognize the issue. It's amazing how little we talk about anxiety in hiring. But the academic research and the outcomes demonstrate very clearly that it has a huge impact, and it disproportionately impacts those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, neurodiverse individuals, and so on. Recognizing the problem means we need to use alternative forms of assessment. And to do that, we need to lead into innovation. Conventional hiring methods are the cause of, not the solution to this problem. If they were the solution, this would have been fixed decades ago. All right? Traditional numerical reasoning tests, situational judgment tests, and the rest of them are the cause of these problems. So how can we fix it? Well, the first step is, in these assessments, they use one-size-fits-all scoring algorithms. If you're anxious, if you're neurodiverse, you're going to be scored with the same algorithm as someone who isn't anxious and isn't neurodiverse. Is that fair? Do we think that's fair? Of course it isn't. We're unable to identify or mitigate anxiety or neurodiversity if we're applying these one-size-fits-all scoring algorithms. Stop training your algorithms on large external data sets. Many online assessment providers do this. They use something called a norm group. Have you heard of that, a norm group? Yeah. That's when you're compared to a bunch of other people and the score is comparative. Well, that bunch of other people is largely white, probably middle class, in employment, and neurotypical. So you're already at a disadvantage when that happens. So yeah, end the use of norm groups. So what can we do? Well, rather than use one-size-fits-all scoring, we need to apply artificial intelligence. And it's possible. So you'll hear a lot of talks about AI today. And sometimes when you kind of investigate what AI means, it's just a bit of scoring or something. And it's not really AI as we would understand it. What we use is genuinely AI. It's a form of real-time machine learning. So what we do is when someone starts one of our online assessments, we're not scoring them, we're learning about them. And I mean we're literally learning. As they make decisions, we're not just looking at their answers, we're looking at how they get to those answers, their real-time cognitive journey. We're capturing data 200 times a second as they're going through that assessment. And the more decisions they make, the more that we learn about them. What is their typical reaction time? How do they express confidence? And that will be influenced by anxiety. It will be influenced by neurodiversity. If you're dyslexic, you may take longer to read the items. If you're dyspraxic, it may impact your reaction times, your movement patterns. If you've got ADHD or autism, again, that can impact the way you respond to decisions. So the first thing we do is we analyze that decision-making process without scoring them, just learning about them. Only at the end do we apply scoring, and we do so with algorithms that are fully tailored to that individual and how they express their confidence. And the result is it's highly effective at accommodating neurodiversity and eliminating bias. And it allowed us last year to win the ISE Commitment to Diversity Award, which we were super happy with. I'm going to give you a case study now, actually two case studies. We'll start with a case study from Sellafield, large nuclear engineering firm. They made the decision in 2022 to redesign their end-to-end hiring process for all their early in-career roles. So that's junior experienced hire, graduates, where the high volumes are. And we reimagined the end-to-end process with a specific set of aspirations to eliminate bias and improve candidate experience. This is what the process looked like. So we started with the AI-powered assessment that identified whether people had a high level of anxiety or neurodivergence and accommodated for that automatically. We then used something called a strengths-based interview. Hands up, who's heard of a strengths-based interview? Yeah. So applied well, they can be really effective for neurodivergent candidates because what you do in a strengths-based interview is you essentially say, we're looking for capability, but we're also looking for whether you actually enjoy what you're doing as well. It's the combination of those two things. And you calibrate that to the individual and how they express their engagement. So it's almost like a real-life version of how the online assessment works. And we provided them with that support and training. I'm going to share some outcomes. And when I do, I want to make a broader point that fairness does not need to come at the cost of accuracy. Actually, if you make an assessment process fairer and you accommodate anxiety and neurodiversity effectively, you get to see the real person. So you raise the accuracy, you don't reduce it. This isn't a zero-sum game where if we dial one up, the other goes down. So these are some outcomes. We reduced the dropout rate in the online assessment from 20 to 0.4% because people weren't getting as anxious, right? And also the length of the assessment we could reduce from 120 to 4 minutes, while at the same time hugely improving the accuracy because we weren't just scoring answers. We were looking at how people got to their answers, how they felt and thought about those answers, whether they were being genuine, whether they were faking it, and that raised the accuracy of the assessment, and we achieved outstanding diversity outcomes across every metric. This has been replicated, so that's Sellafield. Here's a Big Six accountancy firm. So the adverse impact ratio is the difference in performance between the majority and the minority group. 2023, they used a conventional method of assessment. 2024, they applied the AI-powered version of the assessment, measuring the same things, by the way. And the adverse impact ratio for females, ethnicity, low socioeconomic backgrounds, and disability, including neurodiversity, hugely improved. And that fed through to the pass rate. So we saw 30% increase in the female pass rate, 65% increase for BME, 79% increase for free school meals, and 87% increase for neurodiversity. Right? So this does work. And these outcomes aren't one-offs. I mean, pretty much every customer we implement with for this methodology, we see the same things. A 3 to 5 minute completion time, very high accuracy, mobile enabled, and so on. And if I could share a few general tips and hints for enhancing diversity and neurodiversity outcomes, the first is develop a joined-up strategy. I mentioned earlier that your selection process, your hiring process, is only as strong as the weakest link within it. So you do need to think holistically. And don't be afraid to be bold, because conventional hiring methods are the cause of these problems. And we cannot expect to do the same thing again and again and again, year after year, and get different outcomes. It's not going to happen. So you do need to be bold, and you do need to lean into innovation if you want to make a meaningful difference to diversity outcomes, particularly when it comes to accommodating anxiety and neurodiversity. But the good news, if you do these things and you do lean into innovation, you can achieve hiring outcomes that are genuinely outstanding, not just fairer, but also faster, more efficient, and more accurate. And on that note, I'll pause and see if there are any questions. Thank you.